Canadian and American trade negotiators are mapping out a potential deal to pitch to U.S. President Donald Trump next week. CBC News has learned that a joint proposal could be presented to Trump as early as Monday. That's as Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc met with his American counterpart earlier today.
So how close are we to a deal?
You know we're not going to discuss those things.
A lot of Canadians are wondering. A lot of Canadians are wondering how close you are.
We'll have something to say when the moment's right.
The pressure to make a deal and to make a quick deal is on. Trump's 50% tariffs are set to hit Canada next week. The Power Panel joins me now. Rachel Siegel is a former director of policy in the Harper government. Michelle Cadario was deputy chief of staff to former Prime Minister Paul Martin. And Emily Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. Michelle, I'm going to start with you. What do you make of the fact that the plan that we're understanding is that Dominic LeBlanc and his American counterpart are trying to present options to Donald Trump? When it's framed like that, why wouldn't they be presenting options to Mark Carney? Are you still able to seek a win when, a deal is being served up to Donald Trump rather than necessarily Prime Minister Carney?
Well, I think that kind of explains the difference in terms of the two leaders' approaches. I would expect that Mark Carney knows exactly what is going on, down to every last sentence and where the period is placed. I don't think that he needs to be briefed up. I think that he is in constant contact with both Minister LeBlanc and with Janice Charette and the team that is down there in Washington. And so, I think that he has been very clear and about what his parameters are. And I just think that it's a different circumstance, whereas I think Mr. Trump has other things that are occupying his mind. He's not necessarily known as the detailed person that Prime Minister Carney is. And I suspect that it's just a matter of the different approaches of it. And I think that our negotiators are very clear about the parameters of the Prime Minister.
Rachel, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's interesting that the Prime Minister chose this week to vacation in Italy, a week where many Canadians' livelihoods are on the line. And we've talked, Katie, a lot about these trade negotiations. And last week we were talking about whether or not we might see a comprehensive deal come out of this. I think we're fooling ourselves if we do, but I think that August 19th deadline is ticking for many Canadians, especially here in the province of British Columbia, where we are seeing 14% of our exports to the U.S. that could be included under those tariffs next week. So like I said, I'm sure the Prime Minister is being briefed, but at the same time, I think it's a little bit tone deaf for PMO to say it's okay for the Prime Minister to go to Italy this week when Canadians are wondering about the future of their businesses, the economy, their jobs, and can't even afford luxury vacations like going to Italy.
Emily, I'm going to get to you in just a second, but I want to give Michelle an opportunity to respond to that. What do you make of what Rachel just presented there?
First, as Prime Minister, and I know this from my time there is never a great week to go on vacation. And I would also bet my last dollar that Mark Carney vacations in a very different way than any one of us. I suspect that he's on the phone, he's on his phone in constant contact. He hasn't just escaped to get it to take away his responsibilities in any way. He is very much a part of this. There's nothing, we know of this government that nothing really moves without Mark Carney's imprimatur on it. And that is very true of this.
Emily, what do you make of sort of the state of where things are right now, given that we know that the talks have intensified? Dominic LeBlanc, third meeting in 3 weeks. What do you make of the overall sort of state of where things are?
I think domestically, obviously, things are going to get tensed. Now, in terms of the conversation, the partisan conversation, I think if the attacks are on optics rather than policy choices that would have been or could be done differently, it's not going to land that far. I think there is still, and the polls show that there's still that trust from Canadians in Mark Carney's ability to handle a situation like this, and so I don't think it's going to land that much. But the situation that Canada is in, I think, hasn't been changing that much from week to week. It is a situation in which you have an American government who is looking not for necessarily a win-win situation, but for a win-lose situation. And when you're trying to cede some ground as a way to appease, because the goal at the end of the day is to show the world that they are winners and we are losers, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are appeasing or reaching a better deals. And so there's been some concerns that's been growing in part of certainly Canadian journalism and Canadian civil societies as well, in terms of how much concession we are making to trying to appease the Washington in trying to negotiate in ways that isn't actually appeasing anything, and it's not necessarily going to help. Like, how much ground are we losing in terms of policy, in terms of economic concession? I think that's what I would be looking into and what it's worth. And I think that's what the pressure is on domestically. And that being said, I don't think that there's a lot of people in Canada who can be confidently say that if they were in the shoes of the chief negotiator, there was this radically different approach that they would take and that they know it would work, because you don't have a normal American-Canadian relationship, and that we are just trying to basically fight for our lives against a government that is much bigger than ours and an economy that is much bigger than ours, with power inequalities that are very steep, and we're feeling the brunt of it and trying to do our best, really.
On the domestic politics front of all of this, Michelle, I want to ask you, Donald Trump, we know that when he talks about deals and when he talks about, his policy decisions, he likes to frame them in a win versus a loss. If there is some kind of deal, and he tries to do that with the Canada-U.S. relationship even more than he's already done now, does that present a problem for Mark Carney domestically, if, he is in a position where he has to make more concessions?
Well, I would separate those things out. I think that the expectation of every Canadian is that Donald Trump, no matter what it is going to declare it a win, a big win, the biggest win ever. How many times has he done that on this war that he created over in the Strait of Hormuz? And how many times has he reopened that again and brought the Iranians to their knees? Like, that is just who he is. He's a bit of a blowhard, and he will continue to do that. So I would separate that out. That's a given. However, I think that it's going to be an incredibly challenging communications exercise for the Prime Minister to be able to talk to Canadians and explain some of the trade-offs, if indeed there are trade-offs, and in every negotiation there is, and about the why, and about the considerations that went behind it, and the intentions behind it, and the values that he brought into it. And I think about, and also, kind of the consequences of not doing that. And so I think that, if I was in PMO, I would be really wanting to make sure that we're working on that. Perhaps a little, as a colleague of mine said, they need a little forward guidance video maybe coming out very soon from the Prime Minister to kind of start to set kind of what we can expect, or what the world of the options actually were. I think that the other reality that we all know is that any deal that Donald Trump signs, he may scrap the next day. And that's the unfortunate volatility of dealing with the Americans right now. It is an incredibly hard and difficult time, and it's very unusual. And so we've kind of got to expect the unexpected, and just ensure that we know what his values were going in.
Rachel, what do you make of the domestic challenges in this moment for Mark Carney if he does have to face, if Donald Trump behaves the way that Donald Trump typically does, and he does frame this as a big win for America and a big loss for Canada, how is that a challenge for Mark Carney, or Canadians kind of used to it?
I think Mark Carney has a big challenge, partially of his own making, because, Michelle talked about the messaging around potential concessions that Canada's making. The issue is that over the last year and a half, Canadians have heard very little about what negotiations are going on in Washington. And while it's fine to say, we don't put our cards on the table, we're now a year and a half in and we're still saying that. And I feel like the Liberals are using Donald Trump and his, sporadic decision making as kind of a shield from having to actually come out and say to Canadians, here's what we're doing. What the smarter messaging plan would be for PMO to Canadians would be to say, Canadians can depend on their government to be negotiating for X. There's been none of that communication over the last little while, and so they're making it harder for themselves if they are in a position where there are major concessions, how they can then come out to Canadians and explain the history of what they've either been negotiating, or there's been a real break over the last 10 months and there hasn't been much negotiating happening. There haven't been true trade talks taking place, and that's also a problem for Mark Carney. So this is an uphill battle in my mind either way in terms of messaging.
Emily, I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of the mood in Quebec right now. One of the things that we have reported here at CBC News, that Canada has put on the table as a possible point of negotiation, a possible concession, is calling on the premiers to lift the American booze bans. I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of how that is playing in Quebec right now.
Well, the premier that we have has some opinions on that, but the question is how long is she going to be premier? We have an election obviously set in October, so that changes the whole mood. And so that's what I was about to say in terms of hearing this conversation. Obviously, we're focused on the consequences of Mark Carney, but both Quebec and Alberta are going into provincial elections, and there's going to be, I think, I agree with Michelle that there's going to be a communication strategy, but beyond that, I think there's going to be a situation if the Canadian economy takes some blow, there's going to be also a conversation in terms of what is done by all levels of governments to help ordinary Canadian basically take that blow and being able to adapt. And if some people are out of jobs, or if the economy slows down and it makes the situation more dire for some people, what is actually done to help on top of the affordability crisis that is already happening and the housing crisis that has been going on for sure for a while now. And so I think that's a question that's necessarily going to pop on the domestic radar, and it's going to pop as well in electoral context at the provincial level, in the sense that everything that has to do with that economic instability definitely set the tone for the election of Mark Carney last year, and so it might play a role in any conversations that have to do in nationalism with both provinces, both Quebec and Alberta as well, and the ways in which people will be unhappy or happy with the options that are being presented to them. And so I think the domestic ramification, the national unity conversation, and the conversation on Canada-U.S. trade has never been more intertwined than it is at this time. To your exact question, what's the mood in Quebec right now? I think people are in denial still for at least a week that elections and political season is going to be back. But it's going to hit hard when vacations are over and people realize that we are still in this mess.
Rachel, I'm curious, if you were advising Pierre Poilievre right now on strategies in terms of holding the Prime Minister and the Liberal government to account right now, what advice would you be giving him?
Well, I think that, Pierre has been walking a very fine line between holding the government to account and ensuring that the government has everything they need from the opposition to feel supported to get the best deal for Canada. What I think Pierre Poilievre has been talking about this week, rightfully so, is if we are making concessions, if we do see a deal, and I would say with the Prime Minister in Italy, it doesn't give me confidence that we will see something over the next week or so. But if we do get a deal, what are we getting out of those concessions? I think that any kind of direction towards Canadians, like I was talking about before, would be appreciated by people who are planning their lives and their businesses and whether or not they can afford to go on vacation in this country. So I think Poilievre right now is doing the job that he's supposed to do as opposition leader. But like was noted, obviously we are seeing Canadians give Mark Carney a long leash, but Mark Carney put that question to Canadians in the last election. Do they want him to negotiate this deal and told Canadians that he'd be the best person to do it. Will that hold up if we get a deal? I mean, one thing, Katie, that I always think about is Trump has another 2.5 years in office. He loves using this uncertainty as leverage, as negotiation leverage. And so what scares me more than anything is that we are going to be sitting here 2.5 years from now, still hoping that this prime minister, that this government gets us somewhere, some stability, so that Canadians can enjoy their lives again.
Michelle, to Rachel's point there, Canada has made concessions earlier throughout this negotiation process. And, you know, negotiations and concessions are part of the entire sort of trade negotiation process. But if Mark Carney can't point to something that is, okay, other than we've staved off another emergency because Donald Trump keeps coming in with threat after threat after threat, and the situation, the power dynamic just has not changed yet. Even though negotiations involve concessions on both sides and compromise on both sides, if Mark Carney can't point to something as, hey, we're doing this and got X, Y, Z in exchange, is that a new challenge for him?
Well, you know, from the start, he has said that he's willing to negotiate and get a good deal. He's not just going to sign any deal. And I think that that's the bar that he has set for himself. And so, yes, you know, he is going to need to be able to communicate what the advantage was and, you know, why this is in the best interests of Canadians. But let's be clear. Without question, Donald Trump is going to say that he beat us over the head and that he won and that we are on our knees and that we capitulated. We know that. The tweet is probably already written. Let's be clear. And let's also be clear. We are going to be still talking about this 2.5 years from now because Donald Trump is still going to be the president. Who knows how many wars he's going to start or how many tariffs he's going to be put on. And, you know, I'm sure it's got all of the betting markets going crazy to try and figure out just how many tariffs can one person bring in on a whole host of countries. Let's remember, it's not just Canada over the course of a presidency. So all of that has to be baked in to kind of whatever comes out of this. I think that if we can see some relief in terms of those 232 tariffs, if we can see a little bit of stability in terms of the back and forth under Kuzma and what that looks like, if we are still considered and having the best kind of negotiated rate of any country in the world, I think that is a measure probably that they would be looking to. I don't know that that's going to happen. And I'm not sure that all answers are going to come out by the 19th either. Because it is a very big and complicated task to go through essentially every single item and every widget that goes into every single item that goes back and forth across our borders. So I think that this is going to be incremental and I think that they will obviously be looking to be able to point to certain relief that is not there today.